Hello and welcome to Lot 49 TV. Today I will be looking at some of the findings of a recent government report on the effectiveness of public education spending. But before that, I want to start with a short introduction to the scale of primary and secondary education in England. In England, the Department of Education is responsible for the school system, and is in charge of ensuring the money provided to schools by the government is put to effective use. This January there were over 20,000 primary and secondary state schools in England. Together they served over 8.1 million students, from the ages of 4 to 19 years old. Of those schools, 11,700 were maintained schools that are funded and overseen by local authorities. Together these maintained schools served 3.8 million students. The remaining 8,500 schools were academies, which together served 4.4 million students. Each academy is part of an academy trust that is directly funded by the Department for Education and is therefore independent of their local authority. Over the 2020 to 2021 academic year, the Department of Education provided mainstream schools with £43.4 billion in funding. 36.3 of that was provided as dedicated school grants, while the other 7.1 was handed out as grants to specifically support disadvantaged students and those with high needs. Between the 2014 to 15 academic year and the 2020 to 21 academic year, real funding for mainstream schools increased by 7.1%. However, as pupil numbers had increased over this time, the actual real spending per student increased by only 0.4%. In 2017, the UK's Conservative government created the National Funding Formula for Schools and High Needs, to increase funding for schools in the 2018-19 academic year. This extra spending was intended to make the funding of schools in England fairer and more transparent. However, earlier this year the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, published a report that showed that state schools in England have suffered their worst decline in funding since the 1980s. It showed that schools in the most deprived areas of the country were the worst hit when the Conservative-led coalition took over in 2010. And according to it, the additional £7 billion promised by the current government will not restore education funding to 2009 levels. This will lead to school spending being 1% lower in 2023 than it was in the 2009-10 academic year. The IFS report triggered an analysis of the government's spending on public education by the Public Accounts Committee. And on the 23rd of September they published their results in a report excitingly named, the 21st Report of Season 2021 to 2022. In the report the committee found that the government's provisional reforms to education spending had some mixed results. To start with the good news, the funding allocations for schools have been shown to be more consistent and transparent under the national funding formula. This is partly because the Department of Education has to publish its methodology and underlying values for the formula every year. However, there are problems too. There has been a shift in the block funding for schools, resulting in some areas and schools having fared worse than others. Between the 2017 to 18 academic year and the 2020 to 2021 academic year, most cities and London boroughs with relatively high levels of deprivation have experienced a drop in real funding per student. Meanwhile, local authorities with relatively low levels of deprivation, such as in the South and in the East Midlands, saw an increase in real funding per student. To give some figures to this, the fifth least deprived schools saw a 2.9% increase in spending per student, up to £4,047 per year. At the same time, the bottom fifth of most deprived schools saw a 1.2% drop in real funding over the same time period, down to £5,177 per year. The report also pointed out that the most deprived areas have also missed out on £90 million worth of pupil premium funding. This is additional funding that can be given to schools for disadvantaged students. It's not just bad for students in deprived areas either, as ministers have been unable to confirm when the promised £30,000 a year salary for starting teachers will be introduced. By contrast, the starting salary for teachers is currently around £26,000 a year. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the video informative. As always, links to all the sources used can be found down in the description. Like all YouTube channels, please feel free to leave a like, subscribe, share and comment. So until next time, have a good evening.